All right, do you want to start by introducing yourself?
Hi, my name's Lydia. I'm a freelance journalist and I cover disability and social issues. My work has appeared in places like the Metro, Insider, and Refinery 29. Back in 2015, I was diagnosed as being autistic. That was after a 3.5 year wait. Um, it was not really a shock, not really surprising, but one of those sorts of like, oh, okay, here's some new information to get used to. Um, I have been a qualified journalist for nearly 5 years now. My debut book is out on the 21st November this month. It's called the Autism Friendly Cookbook and does what it says on the title.
Yeah, so like, as you're saying, you was diagnosed in recent years being autistic, and it took you a few years, right? So what was it about you that you saw you're autistic, and what were the things about being autistic that you think thought that you would be able to make a book on autism recipes?
Um, so that started out with personal independence payment. Do you mind me asking? You're in the UK, aren't you?
Yes.
So I just wanted to check just before, like, I didn't want to be patronising in explaining this.
Oh, it's all right.
Personal, it's a personal independence payment is not accessible. It's notoriously terrible in the UK. Um, I was made aware that I qualified for personal independence payment, which is also known as PIP. Um, the thing about this is, it was one of those things where I knew it was going to be bad. I didn't know just how bad it would be. So I had applied and I can speak somewhat fluently, although it takes me a lot of preparation for this, as it does for a lot of autistic people. So this is during the lockdown, and this is as the at the first stage of the assessment, they do phone call interviews during the lockdown. Um, so I was sort of like, just answering questions, doing my thing. So the personal independence payment service had come back with a basically rewrite. It was along the lines of she can just learn to not be autistic. Um, there was a line in it which said that I could just learn basic skills like how to cook. I can't just learn I'm autistic. If I could just learn, therefore I would be, not on the spectrum. Um, but it was one of these things where I had gone away and I talked to people personally and people that I knew professionally as part of my job. And it started to take shape that there was this sort of kind of universal experience and not being particularly educated in terms of how to, cook, bake in an accessible way. Um, Sensory issues, parents not understanding, teachers saying you're just being fussy and all that sort of thing. Um, that was a period of about 4 days, and I remember sort of thinking like something needs to be done. It was just sort of one of those wonderful moments, was sort of thinking this needs to be written about. So on the fourth day, I think this was about maybe 2 o'clock in the morning. It was one of those sorts of like I couldn't stop thinking about it and I couldn't sleep. Um, so I remember I had a notebook out and just sort of scribbling like this sort of idea of how to do a cookbook almost. So I went away, I pitched it to Jessica Kingsley, who have an open pitch form on their website. It was just sort of kind of inspired by the ridiculousness of what personal independence payment is.
Yeah, as I said, with autistic people starting to cook and being able to do stuff like that is like a thing. As you were saying, it's about like difference in being able to do tasks, and as like I listed down in the questions of with autistic people, you can have the challenges of ADHD or dyspraxia with it,
Yeah.
or like other conditions. So like there's can be those sensory differences with eating and those things are different from a neurotypical person. And you can have some of the difficult challenges in planning and you know, as I said, planning the stuff you were trying to do and the motor challenges of doing the cooking.
Yeah, it's if you look at a kind of a standard cookbook, it's actually quite difficult as well. So in terms of how, I don't know, just in terms of the format of how a cookbook is written, it doesn't have. Sometimes you need to pre-prepare ingredients before actually using them. So it might not say, like chopped tomatoes before you roast them or whatever. Obviously, like it's it's the expectation that people just automatically kind of understand and know, but very often that's not the case.
Yeah, I know what I mean. It's been quite vague in instructions and not been explicit enough. And like as you kind of hint with it, like with the education, and it can be from like when you start learning to cook in school and cookery lessons, that even then there isn't a explicit, vague under vague instructions are to lay, and there can be like that challenge from in a cooking lesson for an autistic person. There can be some challenges in thriving in that school environment. So do you find that you went to also adapt things for, like teachers of the cooking teachers and people helping autistic people educate them in cooking to help them understand how to help make them do better?
It's that needed to happen anyway. So
Yes.
during the lockdowns in the UK, I was involved with an organisation that would teach autistic individuals and their parents. Very often, teachers would come along. One of the presentations that I had to deliver was around autism and food, and it blew my mind, and not in a good way, in the sense of very often strategies when it comes to food and being on the spectrum are actually quite easy to implement, rather than sort of we have this idea around kind of food culture that we must finish everything on our plate, and if you don't, you are just fussy. Why is it, for example, that it's a revelation effectively to say, okay, here's something, why don't you just serve it in a different format? Or the amount of individuals who didn't know about the physical adaptations was really quite interesting. If you have issues with motor skills, for example, it may mean that, cutting up food can be quite difficult. So why is it that we don't talk about things such as weighted cutlery, or if you don't like your food touching each other, why can't you have a meal separator?
Yeah.
Virtually no one knew about it. It was quite scary, to be honest. And it was one of those things where I remember sort of thinking there just needs to be like one resource, where this is just in one place. So in terms of when writing the book, it was imperative that that would happen. So in there's two parts to the book. So the second part is recipes. There's 100 recipes in this, but the first part is kind of like for parents, teachers, carers, that sort of thing. So to say what sensory issues are, how to adapt, physical adaptations. There's also a chapter where autistic individuals, where they speak for themselves. Very often, we think in terms of quite sort of like medical terms. So when people say, go away and read this, why is it that we so very often rely on what a doctor is telling us in terms of how our experience is? I wanted the autistic people to be allowed to actually speak for themselves rather than being spoken over.
Yeah, I guess you really found like a gap in the area of autistic book communication, autistic cooking information, and how to teach people on the experience autistic people have with food. As you were hinting there, there's a lot of misunderstanding and a lack of wanting to listen to autistic people, about how they experience food. And as you're hinting that sometimes they can be like patronizing with the medical model and all that, and the stuff of like, you know, not actually addressing and learning from autistic people. And I can tell with your book, you wanted to listen to autistic people about their experiences with food, and I get a wider community, wide way of listening to community about this.
Well, it's dehumanizing, and also, if you, from a journalistic standpoint, I would argue that if you don't listen to the subject of the story, you're not doing your job. So just as a kind of, I shouldn't be criticizing my profession, but I will. So very often we have kind of like tragedy stories that we run. We shouldn't be running it. It's very often like, oh, I'm the parent of this particular child, and that child is such a tragedy. Poor me, pity them, type of thing. Or it says about kind of like, if you're the person at the center of the story is the person that you should be speaking to, so the disabled person themselves. Unless, of course, there's restrictions in place, such as when it comes to the law. You shouldn't really be talking to like adults or like the carers or the teachers unless it's strictly relevant. It's so very often not when it comes to individuals who are on the spectrum. I don't understand why there just seems to be kind of like this convention where we don't talk to the people actually involved. It's quite dehumanizing. It's as a autistic person myself, I find this so very often. So even if I was just to go to the dentist, for example, I always have someone with me because of previous experiences where when I've been by myself, I've actually been not treated particularly well. So the medical professionals will actually talk to the person who's with me. They won't talk to me even if I'm in the dental chair. It's absurd, and when it's imperative that we actually start telling the actual story rather than just sort of the fringe, sort of like the tragedy bit.
Yeah, this is a common theme that I've been finding from the interviews of people felt that they're not listened to, or like when autism and disability is described in the media, that like if the disabled people are asked, it's often asked the last. And I can tell that with your journalism, you're trying to put disability and the people you're addressing and talking about, representing your work, trying to put them at the limelight to give them that platform to speak and represent yourself. And I can tell that by talking to different people for, you know, your research for the book, you have done just that.
Well, it's sort of, it's the right thing to do. It just sort of, it blew my mind, really. It's so, as an example, prior to the pandemic, I was flying by myself for the first time. I was dropped off by, I promise this is relevant. I was dropped off at the airport by my mother, and we had gone to the assistance desk because I had never flown by myself, and they said, come to the assistance desk, we will help you. So I had gone up to the desk and I said, hi, my name is so-and-so, I'm on the autistic spectrum, I need help with my flight today. It's the first time I've flown. And I will never forget this, the woman in charge of this, she automatically, as soon as I said I'm autistic, sorry, I'm so sorry.
Right.
As soon as I said I'm autistic, I'm a disabled person, I need help, she automatically turned to my mum, who was stood there, and said to my mother, what access needs does your daughter need help with? To which my mum was sort of a little bit taken aback, to which she, God bless her for saying this, she turned around and said, well, I don't know, why didn't you ask her? Like, it's a sort of, if you're wishing to be helpful in any kind of way, why don't you ask the disabled individuals what they need the help with, rather than just assuming? It's sort of like we have this sort of preconceived notion of what this is. It's quite one-dimensional.
Yeah, and as I said, it can be quite painful and cringing if you've seen that happen, and being like actually feeling that experience first person. And with that, it's like autistic people can feel a bit more exhausted and really like exhausted enough by these social interactions, but then having to advocate and try to correct all these things. So I guess as a journalist, when you see like the like not really representing things as it should, I guess you find it quite tiring, and like you've been able to learn about all the different dehumanizing ways of not addressing the people first.
It can be tiring, but it's one of those things that motivates me to try and do better. It's that I'm so sorry. That sounded so cheesy saying that. But it's one of those things where it it's how am I going to put this? It's I freelance out of choice because as much as I love my industry, it is so very ableist. It's so very tokenistic. It's one of the key values that I have, that I will not be a tick box. I will not deal with organizations that treat people this way. I will make my own space. And it's sort of, I think that it's sort of healthier in that way, to sort of, in the sense of sort of, rather than, or we talk so much about inclusion, but this is one of the most exclusive professions. And added to that, very often, editors, for example, very often they do not take criticism particularly well. I've been told off for being apparently too judgmental on occasion, just for effectively owning the space that I'm in. We need to be doing better by disabled journalists. We need to be doing better in terms of how we cover the topic of disability and neurodiversity. It shouldn't be. Individuals have been so nice about this book, even though it's not out yet at the time that I'm talking to you. They've been so nice in the sense that they have said, this is great because this actually works to us. Well, isn't that the job that you're supposed to do, in the sense of, if you write it, you make it work for someone, as that's the purpose of the...
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really can tell that, as I said, like you can see that it should be already working, and I guess where like, your motivation comes from is like there's so much not being done in this area that you want to be able to step up and start being able to make the change, to be able to see disability reporting that's positive and that's led by disabled voices and reporting from things how you think they should be.
I must confess, I did have a slightly emotional moment recently. So my friend has two very small children, and so I was talking on the phone to her, and her little boy came in, and so he's on the autistic spectrum as well, but he is infinitely curious, and he is so clever. He is so wonderful. He will go very far in his life. But I could just hear on the other end going, "Mummy, what's a journalist?" And then I remember after this phone call, she'd be saying, "Oh yeah, my son was talking about you the other day. He's so interested. You've inspired him." That was just so absolutely wonderful. But in the sense of sort of, we shouldn't be, in the sense of inspiring as sort of like the one-off. This should
Yes.
just be standard. It should just be standard, just to sort of like, here we are in the workplace, we're here to do a job.
And I mean, it should really have a healthy representation, in the career field, and not every because, there's only like a few, like journalists with who are disabled that many people can name, and like at all, because there's, as you say, it's a lot of underrepresentation in mainstream media, and as you say, there's not many people in the editing rooms, newsrooms that are disabled. And that's one thing that you like kind of motivated to see that representation, but equally find some frustration with. And so, like, going back to some of the stuff in the book. So, you were talking to many disabled, autistic people about the recipes, and so like, tell me about some of the recipes that you've been able to collate for the book and go with.
Okay, so the book is divided, the recipe section is divided into four. So it has breakfast, lunch, dinner, and then miscellaneous recipes. The miscellaneous recipes is basically, I like cake. It wouldn't have been my book if there wasn't a section for kind of like cake-based things. So it started out of the 100 recipes, 30 of those are from other autistic individuals. We have people like the YouTuber Yosemite Sam, we have Sienna Castellan, we have Laura James, and other names such as that. In terms of, so in the way the recipes are written, there are things, so there's a key for dietary and sensory needs, which is illustrated. So we had, I'm trying not to say as I'm talking to you, we had Emily from 21 Sensory do the illustrations. So there is an illustrated key for the, I'm so sorry. I had COVID in March, and I have brain fog sometimes, and sometimes words get stuck. She did the sensory needs and the kind of like dietary needs. So there's a key for that. There's an energy metric, so you can see how much energy will be lost. There's a skills key. So if you are kind of like a very sort of, you just want a very sort of basic meal, that's indicated quite quickly on. When it comes to the recipe, it has a pre-preparation section. So if you have executive functioning issues, that means that you can line up the ingredients first, rather than, you know, having to sort of like on the whim sort of go, oh, I need to cut this, but then like, you know, all this other stuff is going on and I feel overwhelmed. The language I've tried to keep as simple as possible. So in terms of, if there's a term that's a kind of like a cookery technique, there is a glossary of cooking terms. So if you don't know what a particular technique is, I've tried to write that out. On the bottom of most of the recipes, there's also a section for expanding your repertoire. So if you want to add something, or if you have like different sensory needs, there's something there just so you can change it up.
Oh, sounds very excellent, really, having the keys and the, you know, very visible aspects of it, and easy to navigate with the guild and all stuff like that, and easy to understand terms. And I think that would make it like easy and accessible for myself, and something I would love to try to cook with. As I think sometimes, you know, like the kitchen can be super stressful for cooking with, and things, you know, like it'd be quite good to find some good recipes to add into my repertoire, and, you know, like collection of stuff that I would cook myself.
Well, it's one of those things where if you, at the end of the day, you obviously haven't, your energy levels are depleted and you just want something quickly. In a conventional cookbook, it's quite difficult to pick up what you can judge as being quite quick and easy. You sometimes, there have been multiple occasions where I thought, oh, that's quite simple to do, I know exactly how to do that, and it becomes so overly complicated, and then something like, you know, gets burnt, or, you know, that kind of thing. It needed to be quite sort of easy to access, in the sense of sort of, oh, okay, you know exactly what you're looking for. The information needed to be just categorized just that little bit extra better in the way that it was being done. That didn't quite make sense, I'm so sorry. But just in the sense of sort of, when having cooked previously, it's something that's privately I found quite off-putting, to be totally honest about this. Why would you get involved in something if you can't see how accessible it is to you? You just wouldn't.
Yeah, because yeah, that would be quite off-putting thing, and if you like can't see what skills and what time, you know, and how much energy that would take out when you're like trying to start to make a meal in the evening, that can be quite stressful if you haven't been able to plan out a certain time and or time managed and organised. And so like if you got that book in front of you, like it can take a lot of that time away from you, like it makes it a lot easier to navigate and probably takes a lot quicker time. And I guess with yourself, like with having long COVID, like with having the help for, like certain keys of the energy and like seeing how much energy that can take up, I guess can be very helpful for yourself then.
I would like to hope so.
Yeah.
At the point that I'm talking to you, there is, as far as I know, there's only 2 individuals who've actually sat down and read it cover to cover. Most people who, I say this in the nicest way possible, most people who I have either given a copy to or have just, they've either flicked through it or they've looked through it to see if they're in it. It's the bulk of the recipes have a story connected to them, because a lot of it comes from my family and family background, and it could even just be things such as, so there's a particular recipe in the book where prior to the pandemic, each Sunday my family would all get together and we'd all go out to a pub nearby where we live for nachos, because they did a particularly wonderful nachos and it was a good way to socialize. It's accessible to me and to everybody else. But it was one of those things where it was sort of like, okay, here's a book, and sort of like everyone I knew had just sort of like opened it up. They didn't quite get, the majority of the individuals so far, what I was trying to do. They were just looking for themselves. There was actually somebody who rang me up who, I really hope he doesn't listen to this. If he does, I shall laugh until the end of eternity. He rang me up and he hadn't quite realised that I'd put him in the acknowledgements because he'd been kind about the book while writing it. To which he said, why the am I in this book? It's like, why on earth would you do that? You've written that to get your own back on me. It's just sort of like, yeah, everyone's been really nice about this, but it has been really amusing to me. I hope it does some good.
Yeah, thing is, it does seem like a really positive idea, and I really like when I was reading up about the book, up on the email you sent me about it.
Yeah.
I was thinking, wow, this sounds like something really good, because I haven't come across a book like that before. And as you're saying, with the memories you have of the recipes and the stories you tell, that's the thing with food, like it's more than just, a meal or something you eat. It's like a lot of memories come with it, and not emotion and feelings.
Yeah, I must get, I like what you say. I think you used the term memories there. I like what you say about that. So there's 2 things. So my wonderful mentor, he died just at the, so in terms of the train of events, I had sort of started with the personal dependence payment stuff. He had died quite suddenly in September 2020, which was around the same sort of time that I got the letters saying you can just learn how to cook. He was an absolutely wonderful human being. The last phone call I had was where I was in conversation for another book to ghostwrite. He was so excited. It was like a kid in a sweet shop. He got very excited very quickly down the phone from the US, going, this is how you write it, and this is how you should interview it, and these are the questions you should ask. At the end of this phone call, he said this thing, and it will stay for me, it will stay with me until the day I die. He said, if you ever sign a contract, send it to me. By that, it's quite a powerful act to have faith in someone. I always read kind of book writing as what proper journalists do. I never thought I would write a book. So he is a part of the book. He is part of the dedication. It would have never have happened if he hadn't have said that. It's also, so at the back of the book there is an illustration. I know his daughter, she's an absolutely wonderful person. I value her a lot. in the family, they described themselves, they had an in-house joke where they described themselves as particular animals. So there isn't illustration, that was just for the family at the back of the book to end it. It's also, and sort of while I was writing this as well, my great-grandmother died quite suddenly as well. I absolutely adored her. She was a brilliant storyteller. She was a wonderful, funny woman, and I miss her still. But it was one of those things where I had to sort of, it sounds really obnoxious saying this out loud, I had to, in some way, I just had to put her into the book. So what we used to do was to smuggle in boxes of Maltesers to her in her care home at Christmas time as her Christmas gift. So by the end, she just had she had a bedside cabinet, and the bottom drawer was where she kept all her kind of like naughty treats. It's also the smell of lavender that I associated with her. She was always kind of, she was very sort of, must have your nails done and the wig perfectly coiffed and all that kind of thing. I forget what it was. I think I put her in as some sort of like cake and put the story connected to her. It's food is community, and food very often it evokes. People talk about food and good times and how they've come together through community effectively. That was important. It was an important element to put in the book, even if this was just like, it will end up on like, some dusty library shelf somewhere, but it was important to put that in.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, that's a lovely, tribute to them, because it's, like as I say, this project has been just so much more than, like just publishing a book, because it's something that means a lot to you, and it's been, I guess, something you always part of you and wanted to do all along. And again, so as I said, like you didn't expect yourself to write a book, but you found yourself doing it, and you thought it was only for proper journalists. But I guess I think you are a proper journalist, and there's some I thought I compliment you, because there is something like good to doing with yourself here, and it's you found a good idea. Yeah. And I guess like there was an element of imposter syndrome about that, is there?
Okay, I should clarify this. So my mother partly knew that I was on the autistic spectrum. I was a very lonely teenager. I was diagnosed when I was 2 months shy of turning 16. But prior to that, I think a lot of autistic people do this, where they spend a lot of time in the school library when there's kind of when there's like break time or lunchtime and it's sort of unscheduled social activity and you have no idea what to do. So my tactic was always to spend time in the library at both of the secondary schools I attended, and then later at college. So it was kind of in the library that I found kind of like crime journalism, in the sense of sort of being introduced to what that was as a format. So I remember reading, actually, tell you what, I'm not going to name check these people, because these are people that I know. One of them doesn't need the ego boost, and they would be like really quite weirded out. But I read a lot of people. I read their work, and I went around and looking for their work, and it was always sort of like, there's the stereotype of kind of like what a proper journalist is, in the sense of, oh, it must be news and it must be quite like, the typewriter and all that sort of thing. It was just sort of, it was really quite strange. So I'm actually sat at my friend's house. I had actually read about her a decade prior to meeting her. It was really quite weird and coincidental how we got to meet, and then all these sorts of like other people that I'd read about as a child. And it was sort of quite a strange sort of reckoning, sort of thinking these are actually people, they're not just the product of a book that I read like, however many years ago. They are the proper journalists, in the sense of sort of like, they've done this job for like 30, 40 years. They have a track record of reporting and all that sort of thing. So it's always sort of weird, sort of, if I have to go to an event or something, they're always quite a lot taller than I am. So it's always sort of like, hi, how are you? I'm just like this tiny person, quite literally so, because you're a lot taller than me,
Yeah.
having to always look up.
Yeah, I think even though that's like it's like a cheesy or corny thing, it's like, like you can, like, if you believe you want to do something, like, and believing in yourself to try to do something, and then you can start get you uh get to end up meeting these people admired in the industry, and like get yourself into the industry of journalism, and I guess find that inside motivation.
Um, I'm not sure really what to say to that, to be honest. It's sort of it's been something that I've had to kind of learn always, and sort of having to relearn.
Yeah.
Um, it, when I was in education, I did not have a particularly good time with it. So I remember many teachers telling me, "Oh, you can't be a journalist, just go to university. You can't be a journalist because you're autistic," and all that sort of thing. Um, so in the sense of sort of like having done my A levels and all that sort of thing, it was sort of like, oh, okay, this is what I'm going to do and to go and train as that. But in terms of kind of like, the thing is sort of where you only have like a limited expectation, because generally speaking, the outlook for us is not exactly great in some respects.
Yeah.
So in the sense of sort of going, oh, I've trained to be a journo now. I don't quite know what to do next, because the expectation was sort of never there to reach that point in the first place. It's been quite weird. Sort of having to kind of like learn and sort of relearn how not to be internally ableist to myself has been quite it messes with my brain.
Yeah. Yeah, I can understand how you would be slow to respond to that question. And I'd say it's like the thing that presents people from get autistic and disabled people getting into these industries and into the field of work. They might have wanted to try, if like they've been encouraged to, like, by like teachers and like parents, and at a young age. Then if that expectation was there when they were younger, then you might feel encouraged. And then that, like ableism in society and what knocks down is still quite a barrier.
it's it's also things such as sometimes I lecture students and sometimes I talk to individuals who want to go freelance. I always try to stress that words have an impact. So you may be reporting, but it is the way in which you choose to report that has an impact, for better or for worse. Not and it doesn't necessarily have to be on a big scale either. I will never forget, and I still remember her name. There was a particular English teacher who taught at one of the secondary schools I was at. Do you remember when The Book Thief came out?
And can't remember.
I had gone to see the film and I wanted to read the book afterwards. You should always read the book first before you see the film. But it's I think it's something like 600 pages long. It's quite a big, chunky text. But that sort of thing I would just read that sort of thing quite regularly. Chunky books for sort of like, lonely child goes to a library, needs a big book to keep them going all the time. So I remember